Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell, and I wanted to take a special look today at the theatrical exhibition industry. If you know me, you know that I love to track box office here on the channel, but even more than that, I'm a huge fan of going to see movies in the theater. And ever since COVID, things haven't been great for theater owners and the entire industry. It's definitely been an up and down ride. There have been some massive hits, but it seems like things are really coming to a head this summer as revenue lags far behind last year and several movies have already vastly underperformed expectations at the box office. Now, this video is specifically focused on the theaters themselves. So some of the factors around financial performance, like studios cutting budgets for movies so they don't have to earn as much, that's important, but that's not what I want to address. I really want to talk about the exhibition industry. And for a lot of people, it's been very easy to point at COVID or point at the strikes and say, well, that's the reason for the downturn in business. And I think that that's part of it. But looking at the overall picture, I think that there are a lot of other problems that are pretty much systemic. They're not the consequence of bad timing or real-world events. I think these are things that are being woven into the very fabric of the theatrical exhibition industry, and it's going to be stuff that's hard to undo. So I'm going to look at what I think are 7 major problems with movie theaters, and then at the end I'll have a plan with what I think are 7 potential solutions to those problems. But let's turn now to what I think the first major issue movie theaters are facing, and that issue is premium video on demand. Back in the Stone Age, aka the time before VCRs, if you missed a movie in theaters, you just had to wait for the studio to re-release it and go see it 2 or 3 years later. Then came the VCR and also pay cable like HBO, where you could watch movies at home, but even that system wasn't anything like what we see now. For example, there was a big gap between the time that a movie was in theaters and it was even available on pay cable or available on VHS. And even when those VHS tapes were released, usually at the very beginning of the cycle, they were priced to own at around $100 to encourage rentals first, and then that price would drop so that people could buy the movie and take it home and watch it anytime they wanted. The progression of the home entertainment system and really the introduction of DVDs and Blu-rays, which hit the market being priced to own, compressed that window. So you had about 90 days between the time that a movie was in theaters and the time that you could own it at home, sometimes longer if a movie was a big hit. And then came COVID, which of course just put the entire industry on its head, and studios decided to change the way that things work. This was very controversial at the time. Universal, I think, was the first major studio that said, hey, you know what, we're going to take our movies and we're going to put them on what's called premium video on demand, or PVOD. That's basically where you can rent the movie at home for 20 or 25 bucks. And usually that wouldn't happen until after that 90-day window. But when COVID hit, Universal said, no, the theaters are closed. We want people to be able to see our movies, so we're going to cut that window to sometimes 17 days, sometimes 31 days, depending on how the movie did. And this was a very big thing. AMC originally said they weren't going to show Universal movies. Then they came to some sort of an agreement, some kind of revenue sharing agreement. We don't quite know what that was. But when theaters reopened after the COVID pandemic, that theatrical window never went back to 90 days. It's now pretty much at 3 weeks or a month after a movie comes out for most movies, with a few notable exceptions. And so now we've gotten to a point where most audiences know that if they skip a movie in theaters or they're not able to get to see it, they'll be able to watch it at home in most cases after only a few weeks. And what I think this has contributed to is that a lot of the movies that are really hitting at the box office are either hyped as big spectacle like Dune Part 2 or Oppenheimer, or cultural events like Barbie and Spider-Man No Way Home, or both. And there is a definite downside here, but I think it's almost exclusively for the movie theaters, because studios reportedly get about 80% of the revenue from people that rent through premium video on demand versus a much smaller chunk of the revenue, even in the first weekend, if they were showing movies in theaters. Now, like I said, originally there was supposedly some sort of a revenue share where theaters would get some of that money, but it's never really been made public what that share was or how long the terms were for. And when it was announced originally, the CEO of AMC, Adam Aron, said that it was a great move for studios, because he said, well, this means that studios will get more money and they'll make more movies, which they'll put out in our theaters, not really addressing the fact that they weren't going to be in his theaters for as long as they normally had been. Studios like Universal, who really led the charge on this whole movement, have said that they don't think that premium video on demand hurts box office revenues, but I'm skeptical. I think there's people that either choose not to go to theaters or who aren't able to go for reasons that we'll talk about throughout this video, who have this as basically an escape shoot that can just say, say, well, you know, whatever, I'll watch it at home. And I think that that is a fairly significant and perhaps growing part of the audience. I think this is a business model that perhaps helps some smaller films that might have had more limited box office appeal by getting them into homes quicker, maybe raising their profile. I don't necessarily think that all premium video on demand is hurting theaters in the same way, but I think for the big titles that this is the case where more audience members are staying home. That's taking money out of that theatrical market, and I don't think that that money is coming back in. Of course, PVOD isn't the only way to watch movies at home. There's also streaming. Streaming isn't going away. We know that even if some services like Peacock or Paramount Plus fold, their libraries will just be added back into existing libraries. But I think that there is an elite level of movies that are released straight to streaming. I'm not talking about movies that were in theaters. I'm talking about movies made for streaming that are only ever showed on streamers that are being given very small theatrical releases or no theatrical releases that could exist in the marketplace in a win-win scenario for everybody. I'm talking about movies like Glass Onion, which got a far too limited release that put up really impressive box office numbers for its size and still became one of Netflix's biggest hits ever. And other movies that I think have a pretty big target market like Spirited, Hocus Pocus 2, Prey, Roadhouse, and even this summer's upcoming Beverly Hills Cop, Axel F. I think all of these films could have had lucrative theatrical windows if the streamers had treated them like just any other movie. There's a time where they're only in theaters, and I don't mean a week or 2 weeks, I mean 30 days or longer, and then they're treated as streaming exclusive films like they always would have been. I think so many times the streamers look at theatrical exhibition and they see it as an either-or proposition, and I don't necessarily think that that's true. I think that there's a model that can be worked out where some of these big, higher profile streaming movies can exist in the theatrical marketplace. It sends some money to the movie theaters. It also sends some money to the streamers, and yet they can also be recognized for the exclusive quote-unquote content that they are. Shudder is actually a streaming service that has figured this out fairly well. They've put out movies like Late Night with the Devil into exclusive theatrical windows that are able to draw impressive revenues, but also serve as basically an advertisement for the streaming service for people to watch it at home if they liked it in the theater. Now, Shudder obviously is much smaller than Netflix or Disney Plus, but I think that there's a way to operate a similar arrangement at scale that could benefit everybody. Now, when most people talk about the downturn of the theatrical exhibition industry, they stop and start with watching at home through PVOD and streaming. But I don't think that those are the only problems. I think it's actually a pretty big web of interconnected problems, a perfect storm, if you will. But if the theater chains want to point the finger at streaming and people watching at home, then they should probably be close to a mirror because they should also be pointing the finger at themselves. The number 3 thing I think is hurting the theatrical exhibition business is the theaters themselves. And I think one of the reasons has to do with the physical movie theaters themselves. And if you'll allow me a personal indulgence, I'll just share something that just happened to me. I was a day one subscriber to AMC A-List. I used the hell out of that thing, MoviePass, right there. But when it was obvious that it was going to be going away soon, AMC brought out A-List back in 2018. And I still think that it has the best value of any of the movie chain subscription services that are out there. And yet this past week, after 6 years as an AMC A-List customer, I canceled my A-List membership, and I doubt that I'll be going to my local AMC very often, except for the rare occasions where there's a movie that's specifically made to be seen in IMAX because it's the only theater in town that has an IMAX screen. I mentioned this in my review of Furiosa, but I went there last Thursday for a 3 o'clock showing of the movie in their IMAX theater. And, you know, it was already not a great situation because the IMAX theater in my local market is in really bad shape. Most of the seats are looking very old, they're torn, they're worn, and an increasingly escalating number of them are also broken. So you sit down and you put your arm where the armrest should be, and it's just a jagged piece of metal, or the actual cushion of the chair is completely off. You can't even sit there, but they sold you the ticket anyway, and you have to go change your seat if you can change your seat, although the number of sold out movies there has been pretty low lately. So I was able to find a functional seat last Thursday, and the trailers played, and then after the trailers were done, nothing happened. The lights just came back up, and after about 15 minutes, the movie theater employee came in and said, sorry, we can't show the movie. There's something wrong with the projector. It's going to take 2 hours for the projector to boot back up, even though it had just shown us the trailers, but I don't know how projectors work. And so I just had to go find a screening later on in the day at another theater. This incident alone wouldn't have been what caused me to cancel my A-list subscription, but this was actually the second or third time that I can remember that I went to that exact theater to go see a movie, and they just couldn't show it for whatever reason or another, and said, sorry, you just got to go home and find another screening. And this was probably the 7th or 8th time that there was some sort of a significant delay of 10 or 15 minutes or more before they could show a movie. This is a consistent issue. This is a pattern of issues. And when you have a pattern of incidents like this, I think it's indicative of one of two things. The theater is either not being given the corporate support to keep its facilities up and to keep its equipment running, or the management doesn't have accountability. Nobody's calling them on all of these different things. Regardless, I decided to take my business to a different theater. The facilities there are good. I've never had a problem with the theater. It's always clean. The movies play. They have a premium format that's good. It's not IMAX, but it still is great quality. And so I voted with my wallet, and that's where I'm going to be going from now on. I'm not saying that every AMC theater is like this. I'm sure that there are a lot of great AMCs out there with great facilities, and I'm sure there are theaters from other chains that are run down. What I'm saying is that this experience, combined with other past experiences, drove me to take my business elsewhere. Now, I keep going to the movies because it's an important part of my job, and also because I love going to the theater. But how many people are not going to make that decision? How many people are going to say, well, you know what? It's going to be out on streaming or PVOD in a month anyway. I'm just going to stop going to the movies. I read my comments and everything else. There are a lot of people that I've seen express that sentiment. One of the biggest dangers for movie theaters right now is people that used to be frequent moviegoers that are now only going 1 or 2 or 3 times a year. And you have to fight to keep those people. And if, as a theater manager, and I don't mean just individual theaters, I mean at a corporate level too, you're not doing everything you can to keep your facilities up to snuff, you're competing with people's living rooms at this point, and it's making the choice very easy for a lot of folks. But it's not just the theater facilities that I think are driving a lot of people away from movie theaters. I think it's the people that inhabit them. And in fact, my number 4 reason is people. Audience etiquette has really seemed to take a nosedive since theaters reopened, especially regarding talking and using phones during the film. And a partial solve is the fact that while theaters can't control what people do, they can control whether or not they enforce their existing policies about talking or texting. Yes, that opens up a whole can of worms about staffing and getting people that are qualified to do that, who feel like they're able to do that. I understand it's a challenge, but running a movie theater is a challenge. But most theaters don't even try to enforce their policies unless a moviegoer steps in or unless somebody leaves the theater and asks somebody about it. And you don't want to put moviegoers in either one of those positions. That's just not something you should have to ask of people. And yet that's the situation that we seem to be in more and more. It is absolutely frustrating to have a theatrical experience ruined by audience behavior. And I get why it drives people to just watch movies at home, because they don't want to deal with it anymore. It's like a waste of money. And yes, enforcement would help to solve the problem, but the root cause of that problem is the fact that people aren't doing what they're supposed to do. And it feels different to me after theaters reopened since COVID. It's not so much an ignorance of the rules. It feels like complete apathy. Like, people just don't care. They don't care that they're disturbing you. They don't care that they're ruining it for somebody else. It just feels so much more brazen, and that makes it even more frustrating. Of all the issues I'm bringing up in this video, this one is the hardest to tackle, because it just involves what other people are doing. There's no policy that can make people change their behavior. And I'm sure to an extent, the old farts like me are just gonna have to sit there and grumble about how people are being a lot more rude than they used to be. But I think that there's a point at which it transcends generations, at which it's not just like, oh, you kids, and they're like, yeah, this old guy doesn't get it. There is a decorum for audience behavior that's existed for a very long time, and it's still observed largely in places like Broadway, and it's expected. It's expected by the audience. It's enforced by the ushers. We need to bring a little bit more of that back into movie theaters. Part of that is the theaters policing it, and part of it is just making sure that you're not being an asshole. Next up is a factor over which the theaters themselves have absolutely no control. They can only control their reaction to it, And that's something that people don't necessarily want to talk about that much, and that is the economy. Now, I don't want to get too deep into an economics lecture here, but the cost of going to the movies is high, and we are at a time where a lot of people are struggling financially. And if you're struggling financially, one of the first things that goes is something like movies. Movies are fun, movies are entertaining, but movies are a luxury when you're looking to save every dollar just to keep a roof over your head. For a standard showing of Furiosa at one of my local theaters with a medium popcorn and a medium drink, the total is $30, and that's just for one person. Now, you can always choose not to buy concessions, but still, tickets for a family of 4, 2 kids and 2 adults, to see Garfield on a Saturday afternoon in my local market with online ticket fees and tax comes out to over $50 even without concessions. And that's here in Arkansas, where ticket prices are a lot lower than they are in the bigger metropolitan areas. And for so many people, especially families, that is just too steep a price, especially, once again, with premium video on demand, when you can see the movie in a matter of weeks at less than half the price. Most people look at ticket prices and say they're just too high, and when you look at the prices over history, it does seem like an alarming jump. Movie tickets in 1995 cost $4.35, which went up to $5.39 in the year 2000, then $6.41 in 2005, $7.89 in 2010, $8.43 in 2015, $9.18 in 2020, and then jumping to an average ticket price of $10.78 in 2023. But when you adjust those numbers for inflation, the average ticket price in 1995 was $8.95. It broke $10 in 2005, and from 2010 to 2020, tickets are actually a little bit more expensive on average than they were at the end of 2023. Tickets really have only gone up around $2 since 1995, and they've remained flat for the last decade or so. But that just covers tickets. What about concessions? They are also incredibly expensive, but I did a little bit of digging on that as well. I found an article from 1988 that was printed in the Chicago Tribune about rising concession prices at their local Cineplex Odeon chain. The story listed a large popcorn as costing $4, a large drink as costing $2, and the most expensive candy item as costing $2.50. Now, when you adjust for inflation, that large popcorn price would now be $10.60, the large drink would be $5.30, and the candy would be $6.63. Cineplex Odeon is now run by AMC, and looking at concession prices for a Chicago movie theater that was formerly Cineplex and is now operated by AMC, the large popcorn is $10.49, the large drink is $7.49, and the most expensive candy is $5.99. So apart from a larger spike in drink pricing, concessions seem to have also largely kept up with inflation. But I think the bigger issue here, and where we sort of have to depart a little bit from the world of movies, is that not everything over the years has kept up with inflation in the way that movie ticket prices and concession prices largely have. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, an average public school teacher's salary in 1995 was $36,675. Adjusted for inflation, that salary in 2022 should have been $70,427. But data shows that the average salary for a teacher in 2022 was $66,397, $4,000 lower than the rate of inflation. And when you're talking about somebody who makes a living on a teacher's salary, $4,000 to $6,000 a year is a significant amount of money, and usually where some of that entertainment budget comes from. Also, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, median household income in the U.S. experienced a post-COVID drop by $4,000 from December 2019 to December 2022, while the median price of a house went up over $100,000 over that same period. And that median home price has more than doubled since 2009, far exceeding the rate of inflation. So if price increases are exceeding wage increases, if wages are falling even temporarily, and if the price of necessities like housing is skyrocketing, then of course discretionary spending is going to fall. And when you're looking at your budget, if you're an individual or a family, it's very easy to say, all right, we'll wait a little bit on the movies and watch it at home for a fraction of the price, or just cut movies out altogether. And really, this is what I mean when I say that all of these things are interconnected. The economy is what's driving some people to save money and watch at home through PVOD. The theaters and the audience behavior is driving other people to make that same decision, and they're not really related to each other, but they all end up the same place with drastic decreases in the number of people that are going to see movies in theaters. It's a little bit like Batman 1989 with the Joker and his Smilex products. Individually, these things are perfectly safe, but when you combine them together, they're absolutely toxic to movie theaters. There's a lot more that I want to break down, but before we do, I want to thank the sponsor for this video, Mando. You've probably heard of Lumi whole body deodorant for women, but did you know that there's now a version for men? It's called Mando, and it uses the same clinically proven formula, but with cologne quality scents for men. Mando whole body deodorant is made with mandelic acid, which blocks the sweat-eating bacteria on your skin from causing odor. I'm a personal fan of the bourbon leather scent, which I have in a deodorant and a body wash for the shower. And it's great to know that as I sweat, I don't have to worry about whether or not I still smell good. I work weird hours, so sometimes I'll throw on some Mando in the morning and pull an all-nighter, but it doesn't matter because I'm still fresh the next morning and can make that Starbucks run before I jump back in the shower. And Mando is a whole body deodorant, meaning it's safe to use anywhere, and I mean anywhere on your body that you want to keep smelling great. Mando's starter pack is perfect for Father's Day. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice like a mini body wash and deodorant wipes, and free shipping. Give the man in your life the gift of aluminum-free whole body deodorant. New customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code that equates to over 40% off your starter pack. Shop Mando's Father's Day bundle with code DAN at shopmando.com. That's shopmando.com. One thing that's been toxic to the movie industry in general for a long time is piracy. And I've been on the record, despite many efforts to explain to me why certain people think that I'm wrong, against piracy in most cases. The only time that I think that you should look outside of an official way to find a movie or something like that is if it has not been made available by those whose job it is to make movies available. But the movie studio's decision to fast-track movies to PVOD, along with the economy and so many other factors, has only thrown gasoline onto an already raging fire that's taking even more money out of Hollywood's pockets. Rewinding back to the Stone Age of the internet, it used to be, for months after a movie came out, the best version you could find online, absent some kind of a studio leak, was a cam copy of a film. Basically, somebody taking a camera into a movie theater and filming the screen. That was enough for some people, but a lot of people just didn't want to watch movies that way. Now, when a movie studio puts out a film on premium video on demand, within minutes of release, there is a pristine digital copy ready for people to pirate. And there's a distinct pattern tying digital releases to a spike in piracy that can be tracked on sites like Torrent Freak, which releases a weekly list of the most pirated movies. The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare hit digital on May 10th, and the week of May 13th, it was Torrent Freak's most pirated movie. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire was released digitally on May 14th, and for the week of May 20th, it was the most pirated movie. And The Fall Guy hit digital on May 21st, and the week of May 27th, it was the most pirated movie. But we also have a case study in unavailability of a movie. Godzilla Minus One. It was an incredibly successful film last year. It opened in Japan in November. It opened December 1st here in the US, made over $100 million worldwide, won an Oscar for Best Visual Effects, and yet it never appeared on the Torrent Freak list of the most pirated movies anytime in late 2023, and only popped up on the list for the first time a few weeks ago, the first week of May, following its, you guessed it, digital release in Japan on May 1st. Piracy has cost and will continue to cost the movie industry billions of dollars. I'm not going to sit here and lecture you about whether I think it's right or wrong. I don't think it's right, but it's what it is. But what studios are doing now is essentially handing pirates a pristine copy of the film just weeks after it is released in theaters. And how many of those people that are now pirating the films at home might have gone to see that film in theaters? Many would argue that the people that are pirating movies would never have gone to see it. But if even a fraction of the people that pirated a movie, even 5 or 10%, were to then go see that movie in theaters, that would be millions or tens of millions of dollars flowing back into the theatrical marketplace. So while studios may be counting the money coming in the front by putting the films out on PVOD earlier in days or weeks, they may not be looking at the money that's escaping out the back door by making those things available so much earlier. The seventh thing that I think is hurting the movie theater industry is also something over which they don't have a lot of control. They basically have no control over it. And that's the movies themselves. Let's be honest, a lot of the movies that haven't done well at the box office also haven't exactly been must-see viewing. Sure, a lot of the movies aren't terrible, but even looking back at my recent reviews of these big tentpoles that are supposed to support the entire industry, a lot of those reviews have boiled down basically to, it's fine. I'm talking about movies like Black Adam, Fast X, Transformers, Rise of the Beasts, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, The Flash, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, Lightyear, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, and The Fall Guy. I didn't hate any of those films. I mean, really hate. And as a matter of fact, I liked a few of them, but I will still acknowledge that none of them rose to that status of, oh, wow, I got to tell people to go out and see this right now. Even movies that I think clear this bar, like Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 and Furiosa, which I didn't love, but I think is a worthwhile theatrical experience, have struggled to find an audience as big as expected because they banked on star power and franchise history instead of what they have to offer that's new. Tom Cruise has a death wish. We all know that. And George Miller is an insane visionary. We also know that. But you can also look at the last Mission Impossible film and at Furiosa and say that they are versions of things that we have already seen in theaters. Studios have to learn all over again how to develop their films and how to sell those movies as movies to their audience, not as things that remind them of things that they already like. The days of the MCU when you could just put $1 billion in your pocket from day one, those days are long gone, obviously, looking at the box office results from the last few years. Studios have to ask themselves simple questions like, why should we make this movie? What are we offering that they haven't seen before? How can we give the audience an experience that's worth their time and money? If you look back at the last few years, audiences have found money in their budgets to go see movies that they feel like offer them value for that investment. It's not like everything is failing, but the bar is that much higher. And I don't think that we should look at the bar and say, well, the bar is too high. I think we should look at the movies and say, how can more of you hit that bar? Yes, there are some movies that are uninspired that have done really well, and there are some other movies that I think are completely original, like Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, that haven't performed well, but that's always been the case. There have always been movies that overperformed what you think they should, and that have been really heartbreaking in their underperformance. I'm talking about the main trend line, and I think that we have been seeing a consistent level of apathy and disconnection, not just from audiences, but seemingly from the studios themselves that are making the movies. So those are the 7 things that I think are killing movie theaters currently, or certainly have the potential to kill them much sooner than anyone had expected. Let's look at some solutions. I have 7 problems. Well, I also have a 7-point plan. I think a way that theaters could be on their way to recovery. Number 1, lengthen the theatrical window to at least 3 months. That takes PVOD off the table for people that want to see movies in a timely manner. And it also cuts down on the availability of high quality copies for piracy purposes. Number 2, theaters and studios can't control the economy, but they can cut prices, either tickets, concessions, or both. They're going to have to work together. And they should also attract customers with discounts. Number 3, in conjunction with that, I think theater chains should overhaul existing theater ticket subscription services to add more value. I think AMC A-List is a great model in that department. Number 4, keep theaters in good condition. Number 5, enforce policies on texting and talking. Number 6, negotiate with streamers for expanded theatrical releases. And number 7, refocus studio development on creativity, novelty, and audience value, even on franchise films and sequels. Now, instituting this plan is going to require cooperation from everybody, from the theaters, from the studios, from the creators, from the streamers, and from the audience themselves. And that's really just to rebuild the theatrical industry to where it was. And that may not be possible. It may very well be that theaters will never get back to where they were. And if that's what the history books are fated to show, then I think that they should also show that the theatrical exhibition business went down, but it didn't go down without a fight. So those are my thoughts on the 7 things that are killing theaters and 7 ways that I think they could possibly be saved. What do you think, though? Are there things that I didn't mention? How do you think you can get people back out to theaters, or do you think people should just give up on it altogether? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching me here on the channel. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.